I'm Davis, and I'm here with NAAM's Interactive Storytime, and I'm going to be reading The Youngest Marcher by Cynthia Levinson. Whenever Mike flew into town, Audrey and her mama cooked barbecued ribs, stewed greens, sweet potato souffle, and Audrey's favorite, hot rolls baptized in butter. Other folks knew Mike as Martin or Dr. King. The Hendrickses used his nickname. They did the same with other ministers too, like Fred Shuttlesworth and Jim Bevel. After Mike blessed the feast, Mama expected Audrey to keep still during dinner. But when grown-ups talked about wiping out the segregation laws that kept black and white people apart in Birmingham, she just had to speak up. Audrey intended to go places and do things like anybody else. I want to eat my ice cream inside Newberry's. I want to sit downstairs at the Alabama. I don't want hand-me-down school books. But stools at the counter, plush movie theater seats, books so fresh they'd crackle when you open them. Those were for white children. Hush, hissed Mama. 9-year-old children should not speak in front of company, especially ministers like Mike, Fred, and Jim, who were bringing dreams of justice. Audrey knew all about segregation. She knew to pay the driver at the front of the bus, then step off and walk around to the back door. Drink from the fountain with the dirty bowl and warm water. Use the freight elevator at department stores downtown. Front row seats, cool water, elevators with white-gloved operators. Law says that those were for white folks. Every Monday night, Audrey and her mama and daddy and her aunts, uncles, and cousins joined neighbors and friends at Fred's church for worship, fellowship, and testimony. She sang and swayed along with the movement choir, her voice spirited and spiritual. Black and white together, we shall overcome. For once, she didn't have to keep still. Then came testimony. White store owners won't hire me. Ku Kluxers chased me. Policemen called me names. The hateful stories made Audrey squirm. She tried to tell her mama, that's not right. Shh. How could Mama expect her to hush? She had to make things right. But what could she do? When Mike visited Fred's church, thousands of people crowded around her to hear him preach. In a voice as taut as steel cables, as smooth as glass, he intoned, "Segregation is morally wrong and sinful." That's true. Fired up, Audrey sat taller. An unjust law is no law at all, he proclaimed. Audrey had listened to Mike explain his plan at her supper table and knew what he meant. If a law is unjust, disobey it. Sit down inside Newberry's. Picket those white stores. March to protest those unfair laws. Why, even marching was against the law. Then get arrested. Fill the jails, Mike exclaimed. Fill Birmingham's jails so full that policemen can't squeeze in one more person. Pack cells so tight that police will have to quit arresting people for demanding their rights. 2 mornings later, she put on a fresh-pressed pinafore and shiny Mary Janes with turned-down socks. Protesters got to look nice. In the meantime, her daddy brought her a game to help her pass the time in jail. Her mama and daddy took her by Center Street Elementary to tell her teacher she'd be absent, maybe for a whole week. Miss Wills wrapped her arms around her. Audrey knew she was proud of her. She said goodbye to her grandparents. You'll be fine, her grandmother said. She knew Audrey would be brave. So did Audrey. Then her mama and daddy drove her to 16th Street Baptist church where the children were gathering. Even before she reached the door, Audrey heard loud voices chanting freedom songs. Inside, hundreds of big kids called out to friends and crowded around signs for their high schools. Parker, Carver. Her head swiveled. Where was the sign for Center Street Elementary? She was the only protester from her school, the youngest child in the whole church, and she knew no one. Audrey huddled by her parents in the basement. But when Jim lined her up with the others, 2 by 2, and the doors swung open, Audrey straightened up. She was going to break a law and go to jail to help make things right. Clutching a protest sign in one hand and her game in the other, Audrey marched out the door. She stomped and sang, "Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me round, turn me round." Half a block from the church, a white policeman stopped Audrey. He pointed toward a police van. Sentence: 1 week in juvenile hall. A matron locked Audrey into a day room with 24 other girls, all older, all bigger, all strangers. Audrey sat down alone and slipped the cover off her game. "I told you to sit down," the matron yelled. Audrey jumped. She didn't remember standing up. The matron dragged her to a dark, empty room. "When I tell you something, you do it," she commanded, "or I'll leave you here." Trembling, Audrey quietly followed the matron back to the day room, but put away her game, lay down her head, and cried. Jail was harder than she'd thought, and she wasn't fine after all. By evening, Audrey was hungry and tired. For dinner, soupy, oily, tasteless grits. At night, a bare mattress with one thin sheet for a cover. The next morning, no fresh underwear, no clean pinafore, no toothbrush. Audrey and her cellmates were let outdoors into an empty concrete pen, surrounded by high prison walls. The other girls talked together. Audrey wondered what her classmates were doing. Miss Wills would be keeping them busy. On another day, Audrey was sent to a huge room and told to sit in a chair that was so high her feet dangled above the floor. 4 white men glared at her. She'd never talked to a white man before. "Are you against America?" one demanded to know. "No, sir," she answered politely. "What do you talk about at those meetings?" another asked. "Our freedom." "Why do you march?" "To go places and do things like anybody else." What was wrong with that? Every mealtime, Audrey stared at greasy grits. She could barely spoon them into her mouth, let alone swallow them. Every night, the cot's wire springs jabbed. Every morning, she had nothing to do but sit alone with her game. In the afternoons, though, more kids crowded into the day room. Some days, many of them arrived sopping wet. A girl explained that firemen aimed powerful hoses at the children. Surging water spun them off their feet and down the street. They got up and kept marching, anyway, until they, too, were sent to jail. By Audrey's 5th day in detention, the police couldn't squeeze in one more person. "We filled up all the rooms! We filled up all the rooms!" Audrey practically jumped up and down. She was so proud. Watching television in the day room, she saw Black people stroll straight into stores and restaurants like they belonged there. No one else could be sent to jail. Everything had changed. After 7 days, Audrey went home. Her mama and daddy wrapped their arms tight around her. washed the jail off her. And for dinner, hot rolls baptized in butter. 2 months later, the city of Birmingham wiped segregation laws clean off the books. Audrey licked her spoon clean at Newberry's counter like everybody else. Black and white together, like we belong. Thank you for joining us for NAAM's interactive story time. We've just read The Youngest Marcher by Cynthia Levinson. Join us every second Sunday of the month for a new story.
Hello, I'm Jason with the Northwest African American Museum. We're here at the Barbecue Pit. And the Barbecue Pit is the historic landmark of Home of Good Barbecue. And on November 8th, 1961, Martin Luther King and a few friends dined here and ordered just about everything on the menu. And it's reported that they stayed here and ate and fellowshipped until about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Dr. King really enjoyed Home of Good Barbecue. And today, you can see some of these items that they have on their menu. They're some of the same items Dr. King would have enjoyed. Brisket, pork ribs, beef brisket, pulled pork, and a whole array of barbecue items.
Over the years, many people stopped by R&L Home of Good Barbecue, including many celebrities and prominent figures who were visiting Seattle at the time, like B.B. King and Dean Martin of the famed Rat Pack. On November 8, 1961, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. arrived in Seattle at the invitation of Reverend Dr. Samuel McKinney of Mount Zion Baptist Church. King was his Morehouse College classmate, Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity brother, and friend. The powerful civil rights leader and minister was received enthusiastically by audiences at the University of Washington's Meany Hall, at Garfield High School, where he spoke twice, and at Eagles Auditorium and Temple to Hirsch. And when he and his entourage were deciding on what to eat one evening, they decided on one of Seattle's finest barbecue restaurants during that era, Home of Good Barbecue, located in Seattle's own Central District. Home of Good Barbecue is renowned. And you knew as a kid it was a special day, usually after church, when you got to have Home of Good. The meat was cooked to perfection at times, falling off the bone because it was so tender. On November 6th, 7th, and 8th of 2021, the Northwest African American Museum sponsored a 3-day commemoration known as MLK 60 to mark the 60th anniversary of Dr. King's historic and only visit to Seattle. We are so happy that the legacy of Dr. King and Home of Good Barbecue lives on through the Barbecue Pit that is housed in the same building of its origin.
So if you're in the Central District and you want some really good barbecue, come on down to the Barbecue Pit. They've got a great array of barbecue items that I'm sure you'll enjoy. And it's right in the Central District, right in the heart, in between 18th and 19th and Yesler. So come on down and enjoy some good barbecue. And I'm Jason with the Northwest African American Museum, and I'm so glad that you got a chance to come and enjoy interactive story time with us today. We'll see you next time.